Hello and welcome back. Today we are diving into a game-changing project management tool, the Gantt Chart. But not just any Gantt chart, we are going to build a fully dynamic and customizable one in Excel. Imagine having a project tracker that updates automatically as your timeline progresses, displays task completion, and gives you a clean, visually appealing layout, all at your fingertips. This tool will streamline how you track your task, keep your project on course, and help you stay organized and efficient. Let's get started and build this from the ground up in 4 simple steps. Let's start by setting up the necessary columns to build the structure of our Gantt chart. We are starting with a blank Excel file, so we will begin by adding our headers around row 8. These headers will define the key details for each task in the project. In cell A8, type task name to represent the actual task that will be completed. In B8, add project lead, which will hold the name of the person responsible for each task. Next, we will have start date in C8 and end date in D8. These 2 columns will track when each task is planned to begin and end. In cell E8, we're going to add a column labeled duration with days in brackets. This will calculate the number of days each task takes based on the difference between the start date and the end date. And finally, in F8, we will add a column for progress in percentage to track the percentage of each task that is completed. Now that we have the headers in place, we will move on to listing the actual task in the task column. These tasks will be organized by breaking the project into 3 main stages: the planning stage, execution stage, and the review stage. Organizing tasks by stages will help us track the progress of different phases in the project. For instance, in the planning stage, we could include tasks like defining the project scope, creating the project plan, and assigning team roles. Moving on to the execution stage, some example tasks could be designing the website, developing the front end of the website, and integrating the payment gateway. Finally, in the review stage, we could include testing website functionality, collecting user feedback, and final project review. To keep everything visually organized, you can use Excel's group function. This feature allows you to collapse or expand sections, which is helpful when you want to focus on specific stages of the project. Here is how you can use the grouping function. First, select the rows that contain the task for a particular stage, such as the rows in the planning stage. Then go to the Data tab and click on Group under Outline. Excel will create a small plus or minus button on the side of the sheet, allowing you to collapse or expand the task in that stage. Repeat this process for the execution and review stages, so you can easily switch between viewing specific parts of the project and hiding others. This grouping feature keeps your sheets organized, especially as you add more tasks or stages over time. This template is flexible, so you can add as many stages and tasks as your project requires. Now that we've set up the task names and categories, let's assign project leads, the people responsible for each task. These leads will help ensure that each phase of the project runs smoothly. For example, for the planning stage, John will be responsible for defining the scope of the project. Lisa will handle creating the project plan, and Michael will be in charge of assigning team roles. In the execution stage, James will lead designing the website layout. Emily will handle developing the front end, and David will be responsible for integrating the payment gateway. In the review stage, the Q&A team will manage testing the website functionality. The marketing team will oversee collecting user feedback, and John will complete the final project review. With the project leads assigned, the next step is to add start dates and end dates for each task. These dates provide rough estimates of when each task will begin and end. To calculate the duration for each task in days, the easiest way is to subtract the start date from the end date. So in the duration column, I will enter this formula. This formula subtracts the start date from the end date to give us the number of days each task takes. But what if you don't want to include weekends? You can use the net work days formula, which only counts work days, excluding weekends and holidays. To do that, you will enter this formula. The start date being C10, comma, and the end date being D10. Close the brackets. This formula counts the number of weekdays between the two dates, making it ideal for business projects that follow a Monday to Friday work week. So once you've entered either formula, Excel will calculate the duration for that specific task. I'm happy with this result. So I will drag the formula down the column to calculate the duration for all tasks. But here is a common issue. If a start date or end date is missing, Excel will display zeros. To avoid this, we will add a condition that leaves the cell blank when there's no start or end date. Here is the conditional formula. This formula checks if the start date cell is empty. If it is, the formula will return an empty string. And if there's a start date, the formula subtracts the start date from the end date to calculate the duration. Once this condition is applied, we can drag the formula down to cover all tasks. Now, when there is no start or end date, Excel will leave the cell blank instead of displaying a zero. Now that we've set up the task names, the team leads, and the dates, it's time to add a progress column to track how much each task is completed. This will give us a clear picture of the project's overall progress at a glance. For example, if defining the project scope is completely done, we will mark it as 100% complete. Creating the project plan might be almost done, so we will set it at 80%. Assigning team roles could be halfway complete, so let's mark it at 50%. Meanwhile, some tasks in the execution stage may be less complete. Designing the website layout could be at 60%. Developing the front end could be at 30%. And integrating the payment gateway might just be starting, so 10%. You can either manually enter the percentage for each week based on the current status, or if you're setting up the project before it begins, you can autofill these cells with placeholder percentages. For now, I'm autofilling the column with some random percentages to simulate progress. So for the review stage, I will set testing website functionality to 0%, it hasn't started, collecting user feedback to 0% as well, and the final project review to 0%. They all haven't started. By doing this, we can quickly see which tasks are on track and which ones may need more attention as the project moves forward. You will also be able to update these percentages over time as tasks progress further. We will use Excel's formatting later to visualize these progress values using bars, making it easier to track the status of your project in a visual manner. Now that we've added the task, project leads, dates, and progress, let's make the table visually clear and easy to read by applying some formatting. Row 7, where we will have the weeks, and row 8, where we have the headers, should both stand out. Let's apply a dark purple background color to these rows. So select row 7 and 8, click on the Fill Color button, and choose dark purple. Next, we will change the font color to white to create contrast and make the text easier to read. Now let's format the different project stages, the planning, execution, and review, so that they are easy to distinguish from one another. We will use a light orange for the stage headers. So select the row for the first stage header, row 9, and apply a light orange background color using the Fill Color option. To save time, we can use the Format Painter to apply the same formatting to each of the stage headers. So with the formatted planning stage header selected, double-click on the Format Painter, Then click on each of the other stage header rows, Execution and Review, to apply the same formatting. Press Escape to get rid of the format painter. To improve readability and make the sheet cleaner, we will remove the grid lines. So go to the View tab and uncheck the grid lines option. Instead of using the default grid lines, let's add custom borders to separate the task rows. This will give the table a cleaner, more structured appearance. So select all the task rows, for example row 9 to row 20, where all our tasks are listed. Press Ctrl 1 on your keyboard to bring up the Format Cells window. Under the Border tab, choose a light grey color for the borders. Add a top border, middle border, and bottom border to visually separate each row. Then click OK to apply the changes. Now, we've made the table much more visually appealing and easier to understand. The dark purple headers and the light orange stage dividers help organize the information, and the custom borders separate the task clearly, giving the sheet a professional and polished look. The next step is to make the date dynamic, allowing the project timeline to adjust based on changes in the start date or the current date. Let's go to the top of the sheet and we will add some important project-related details such as the project name, start date, current date, and week in progress. So in cell A1, type project name, and in B1, type website redesign. That's the name of the project. In cell A2, type start date, and in B2, have this date pasted. This will be the official project start date. In cell A3, type current date. For this, we will use Excel's built-in function to always display today's date. So in cell B3, enter the today function, double-click on that, and close the parentheses. This formula will automatically update the current date every time you open the file. Now let's calculate the weeks in progress. This will tell us how many weeks have passed since the project started. So in cell A4, type weeks in progress. And in cell B4, enter this formula, minus the start date. Have the formatting changed from date to general. Right now we have the result in days. We need to convert it into weeks by dividing by 7. We will also use the roundup function to make sure we round up to the nearest whole week. So I would have the formula updated to include roundup, add an opening bracket to that, then come to the end here to divide by 7, comma, and 0. Close the bracket and press enter. So Excel will calculate the number of weeks that have passed since the project started. To make this even more user-friendly, let's reformat the result to display the text week before the number of weeks. Here's how to do that. With B4 selected, press Ctrl 1 on your keyboard again to bring up the Format Cells dialog box. Go to the Number tab. Under Custom, type this. This will format the cell to display the text week, followed by the number of weeks that have passed, like week 3 or week 5. To make this neater, I'm going to reduce the word week to just 2 letters. So I'll get rid of the he and we have just this. You can see a preview of the results we're going to get here. So I think I want to close up the space. So I'm going to close up this gap here, and that's what we have. So click OK. To provide more clarity to users, we can also add a note to the start date. So right click on cell B2 and choose New Note. In the comments box, you could write something like, insert the official start date of the project here. This way, any new user of the template will know what to fill in here. So by setting up the start date, current date, and weeks in progress dynamically, your project timeline will automatically adjust as the project progresses, helping you track the status over time without having to manually update these fields. So I'm going to make this area bold to make it stand out and probably give it a light fill color. Let's go with this light gray. Now let's move on to building the Gantt chart. which will visually track the project's progress over time. We will use row 8 to display week 1, week 2 and so on, and row 7 to show the actual calendar dates corresponding to those weeks. Let us set that up. I'm going to close this a bit to create a separator. Then in cell H8, type 1 to represent the first week of the project. Then in cell I8, type in this formula to add 1 to the previous week, generating week 2. But just like we have it here, we would like to have this formatted to show the word WK, that is week, before each number. So I'm going to copy the formatting function here, except for the fill, by double-clicking on the paint bucket and applying it to these two. We don't want this fill, so I'm going to change this fill back to what we had. Make the text color white. Now drag this formula to extend it as far as necessary. So you can drag this fill handle, that is the small square at the bottom right corner of the cell, to automatically fill the rest of the row. So I'm going to extend this all the way down as much as you can. Next, let's add the actual dates corresponding to this week's. The first date in row 7 will be the project start date that we entered earlier in cell B2. So I would have the project start date linked to this place, so it updates automatically. And in cell I7, type this formula plus 7. This formula will add 7 days to the previous dates, representing the start of the next week. So I'm going to drag this formula across row 7 until it matches the number of weeks we created in row 8. By doing this, you now have a clear Gantt chart layout showing both the week numbers and the corresponding dates. This setup will help in visually tracking tasks across the project's timeline, from week 1 through to the last week of the project, depending on the duration of your project. So this is the foundation of the Gantt chart. Next, we will move on to adding dynamic bars to show task durations and progress in the upcoming steps. Now that we have the weeks and the dates set up, it's time to add conditional formatting to automatically highlight the task durations on our Gantt chart. This will give us a clear visual representation of when each task starts and ends across the project's timeline. Here's how we can do that. Highlight the area from H10 to the last row across your timeline. In the Home tab, go to Conditional Formatting and select New Row. In the pop-up menu, choose Use a formula to determine which cells to format and enter this formula here. H7 refers to the date in row 7, the weekly dates. C10 refers to the start date of the task in column C, and C10 refers to the end date of the task in column D. So this formula checks if the date in row 7 falls between the start date and the end date of the task. If the date is within this range, Excel will highlight the corresponding cell in the Gantt chart. I'm going to choose a light purple fill and click OK. Now, when you view the Gantt chart, the cells corresponding to each task start and end dates will be automatically highlighted in light purple, showing exactly when each task will occur. It's showing that the defined scope task will cover this period, and the create the plan task will cover this period. As you update the start or the end date of any task, the purple bars will automatically adjust to reflect the new duration. With this setup, you now have a dynamic chart where each task duration is clearly shown with the conditional formatting that automatically updates as the project progresses. Now that we have the light purple bar showing the task duration, we will add another layer of conditional formatting, a dark purple bar, to visually indicate the actual progress of each task. This will allow us to track not only when the tasks are supposed to happen, but also how much of each task has been completed. Here's how we're going to do that. So go to the Gantt chart area where the timeline begins. For example, H10, we're going to add a dark purple bar, which is going to be dictated by the progress. So if it's 80% done, then it should be filled pretty much to this place. Before that, we want to work on this part here, the progress column. We are going to change the coloring here by adding a data bar. So under conditional formatting, go to data bars and let's say we go with this field. Alright, so we have now completed the progress bar with the data bars on it. And we also have these highlight colors over here based on the start and the end date. But it doesn't show how much we've completed here based on the progress bars. So we're going to work on that. Right now at 50% progress, we should have an highlight showing up to here. So there should be a dark purple color to fill up this space halfway to show the part that's been completed. This is going to require a slightly complex formula, so let's get started. So in the Gantt chart area, where the timeline begins, for example, cell H10, I'm going to type in this formula. So this is saying that the start date over here has to be greater than or equals to the start date here. And the same date has to be less than the end date. H7 refers to row 7, the week date. C10 refers to the start date of the task. D10 refers to the end date of the task. And F10 refers to the progress percentage of the task. So this formula calculates the progress by checking if the date in row 7 falls between the start date and the calculated position based on the percentage completion progress. So with this formula, highlight the same range that was used earlier. Depending on your Gantt chart, go to the Home tab, then Conditional Formatting, New Row, and select Use a formula to determine which cells to format. And this time, choose a dark purple fill color and click OK. So I'm going to copy this formula and have it pasted here. Now, tasks that are, for example, 50% complete will have half of their timeline filled with a dark purple, while the remaining portion will still be in light purple. As you update the progress column, the dark purple bar will grow or shrink accordingly to reflect the current progress of the task. This step helps to visualize how far along each task is relative to its duration, making it easier to track progress at a glance. So we have a progress of 100% filling the entire cell with a dark purple bar, and 50% will fill only half of the cell. Now for clarity, let's add borders. So select all the Gantt chart area, go to the Home tab, Borders, then All Borders. This will add a neat grid around each cell, making the table easier to read. I'm going to delete all these parts because we don't need it. So highlight all and delete. If you want to emphasize certain sections of the Gantt chart or task list, you can further adjust the border. For instance, you can highlight the stage headers, the planning, execution, and the review stages with thicker borders and change the border color to a light gray for a subtle division between rows. To enable both horizontal and vertical scrolling while keeping your headers visible, you can use the freeze panes feature to lock not only the top rows, but also the first few columns, such as the task names and the project leads. So if you want to freeze both the rows at the top, that is row 7 and row 8 for weeks and headers, and the first few columns, e.g. column A for the task name and column B for project leads, click on cell C9, just below the headers and to the right of the task list. Select Freeze Panes from the View tab. Now when you scroll down, the weeks and the date headers will remain at the top. And when you scroll to the right, the task name and the project lead stay fixed at the left side of the screen. By freezing both rows and columns, you can smoothly scroll through your project timeline while keeping both headers and the task details visible at all times. This setup is especially useful for long project timelines or when working with many tasks. And there you have it. Make sure to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe for more Excel tips and project management tools. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.